Howdy, y'all. It's me, Brother Damon Chief Jones here. I just had to attend to a funeral and just got back from lunch. Thus the toothpick. Anyway, this is going to be Cocktails 3, JFK, and talk. Whatever you want to call it. Let me get my toothpick put up here where I'll know where that rascal is in case I need it. And everybody asked me about tie tacks, or a couple people asked me if I had any agency tie tacks. Well, there's the one from the Texas Rangers. I don't know if you can see it that good or not, but anyway, getting back to JFK. In I think it's February of '78 when I started as a police cadet in Dallas. Okay, used to, if I worked out of district, which I was out of Northeast Substation in Dallas, but if I worked out of district, say Southwest, or there's Northeast, Southeast, Southwest, and Southeast substations, and there's Central. If I worked out of Central, which I'd worked out of Central a handful of times, probably 3-4 times, but I used to work A&I, accident and investigation. So those were major crash, where 3 or 4 cars was in a automobile accident, or they involved commercial vehicles, and all fatalities. All fatalities was A&I. Even if you had a unit there, you called A&I, because they were trained in vehicular homicides, multiple vehicle crashes. So there was a lot of complex things going on at the time that A&I took care of. Well, A&I, where everybody else has a sector, like from here to here to here to here, this is your sector. It might be 1 square mile, I don't know, it might be 2 square miles, however much your sector covered. It go from so-and-so block to so-and-so block. Well, A&I patrolled the entire city, because you could get a call at any part of the city to any part of the city. It didn't matter, okay? So you just patrolled, and wherever you got a call, you just went to it from wherever you was at, okay? So that's just the way it was. Well, when I used to work A&I, sometimes, you know, it might be on a Monday night or Tuesday night, and you'd go at 11 at night to 7 in the morning, or midnight to 8. Those were the 2 shifts. They varied an hour, so off-going shifts and ongoing shift, you'd have at least half strength in a sector, while some were going off, more was coming on. So you would never have an uncovered period. That was DPD policy in Dallas. Anyway, whichever shift I was on, somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, especially during weeknights, there wasn't nothing going on. And so a couple of guys, they were JFK buffs, and I'd ride with them, and Dallas had DSF, Dallas Security Force. They were authorized peace officers, just like Dallas Police. You had Dallas Police, Dallas Park Police, and Dallas Security Force. Even though they were called security, they had armed security commissions through the Texas Security and Private Investigators Agency. I can't remember the exact title for them, but they were also commissioned through TCLOS, which now is called TCO. Well, anyway, so they were dual certified. They could arrest everybody, and they had red and blue lights on their car and so forth and so on. Well, they take care of all city buildings, like the city courts building. Not necessarily there, that's police all in the building, but they had certain things that they did around the building. And they would take any city property, certain buildings, health departments, anything that the city of Dallas owned that was a building or a property that they owned or that they leased, that they were in control of, they took care of it. Well, see, the school book depository, or the Texas School Book Depository, for all my understanding, if I'm wrong, somebody can write in the comments and correct me, but my understanding then and now is still the same. All the school books that were authorized by Texas, the Texas School Book Depository, they deposited books that were approved by Texas for math, English, reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever it was, science. It all went to the school book depository. So when you had books that were old, that were worn out, that were out of date, something just wasn't right with the book, then you could return it. Okay, and so area books would be shipped in. Books would be sent in place of it. Okay, so you had several different areas. Well, the school book depository, this is way before Dallas Independent School District, DISD, had their own police department, as best as I remember. I don't think they come on until the 80s or the 90s. Could be wrong about that, but anyway, I know that at a point in time between 78 and 80, Dallas Security Force was down there maintaining the parking lot or the building for the city schools or whatever. Anyway, if we wanted to go in the building, we just tell security we wanted to go in and go sightseeing. So we went around in all the little offices and all the little different places on all the different floors. Eventually, over time, I've been in every inch of that building. I don't think there isn't an inch I ain't covered. Well, way back when all this stuff happened, and I always wanted to go to where the sniper's nest was. So they said, well, here's where they say was the actual sniper's nest. And people argued if it was from this window on the corner or the next window. So there was always arguments in that area, okay? And then there was arguments if it was on that floor or the next floor. So there was always argument, but they said this is the official position that they said it is. So, you know, I walked around that area and I looked at everything. Back, it became a museum many years ago, but you know, this, like I say, it's between 78, 79, 80. All 3 years I was in and out of that building probably 3 or 4 times a year. You know, every so many months I'd want to go back and look at something, or I'd read new stories or new allegations that were being made by various people, and so I'd go and I'd go back and look at something and see if it was right or wrong. And I'd look at all the other buildings, and I'd look down from that point of view where Kennedy was at and where he turned, and some of these other guys, they'd tell me things that they had heard from other officers. I don't know if it's true or not, and I'll tell that in some more videos. But anyway, speed up to around the end of the year 1985. I'm working as a police officer in another agency outside of Dallas, and R.E. McKinney. He had been a lieutenant in Dallas, so that was Lieutenant R.E. McKinney. He worked in crimes to homicide, or assault to homicide. So his forte, or his specialty, was anything from somebody slapping somebody up to they were critical but still alive. So he was actually assigned to Governor Conley, that was the Texas governor at the time. The governor that's sitting in front of Kennedy. He's actually offset from Kennedy a little bit. So there goes the magic bullet theory about the bullet had to go this way and that way. Well, anyway, he was a lieutenant, and that picture where Jack Ruby comes in with his gun, and he comes in and he gets on Oswald there, and he does like the gut shot, you know, and you can see Oswald go like that. Well, there's a man on the left side and a man on the right side of Oswald. Well, just behind the man that's on the left side, if you're looking directly at the picture, there's a man that's kind of taller, and you can see he's got very, very dark black hair. Okay, some people have colorized the picture now, but anyway, that's R.E. McKinney. Well, he was assigned to work on Conley's case, and he did. But because all of his information intertwined with Kennedy's assassination, which he was on Kennedy's assassination at that time, because he was an assault to homicide, but not homicide. So anything short of homicide, where he was still alive. Well, he was still alive for an hour, hour and a half legally. So he's working on Conley and on Kennedy both. So he worked on both cases. But they thought that Kennedy was likely to die. From the officers on scene said, you know, there's no way he's going to make it. So officers on the scene basically told him, said, you know, you're going to probably wind up working on this Kennedy thing because you're going to have a lot of information even if it becomes homicide. So all the homicide investigators and serious crimes to homicide, up to homicide, they all kind of got together and worked together on the whole thing because it was all intertwined. So they said, look, let's don't split hairs and you do this and we do that. Let's all work together however we can, and we'll compare notes and go over different things. And they were working with the Secret Service, and the Secret Service kept trying to direct them what to do or what not to do. And Secret Service agents kept flooding into Dallas from different places. They were coming in at Love Field Airport. They have other offices throughout Texas and Oklahoma, because Oklahoma ain't but like 100 miles or 110 miles up, so they were kept flooding in. Well, anyway, I went to work at this other agency, and the man that was chief of police, he had just been sworn in, was R.E. McKinney. Well, he knew I was a big buff, and so he'd tell me different things. And he said, you know where the school book depository is over here, if this is the road that goes right in front of it. And he said they had to come down here and they had to turn and go in front of it. He said there's a building that's straight back behind it, and I can't think of the name of that building for nothing right now, but he said it's got a straight line view. He said we had the belief originally that the shots come from this building, and there was people that said shots come from that building and they saw some movement up there at that building. People said they saw movement in this building. He said, so we knew it was one or the other or both buildings. We didn't know how many shooters might be involved. He said then over here where the fence line is, he said there was supposed to be a police officer in there, and he said I don't know if it ever got in the reports or how it come out, because he said reports were wrote and rewrote and edited. And he said they took a bunch of papers in a 55-gallon barrel drum and was burning them. I don't guess they had paper shredders or they didn't have them there, but he said they had sergeants and lieutenants that write stuff up, and then captains or the chief's office or Secret Service said no, that's not accurate, that's not right, da-da-da-da-da. So there was writes and rewrites, and they would mark out with a red pen anything that wasn't wrote. They'd say change this word or change this sentence to say this. Kind of reminds me of James Comey when Loretta Lynch said it's a matter of interest or whatever she said, not an investigation. So it changes the tone. It says something happened, but it changes the presentation. So R.E. McKinney stuff that he would write, he said they told him to change it, and he said, hell no, I won't. He said, I'm swearing an oath that this is a fact. And he said, if I do anything else, it's perjury. And he said, I come out of the Marine Corps. And he said, we tell the truth. And said, we do what we're told, so long as it doesn't violate our conscience and it's not a lie. And he said, changing it slightly is okay, but said, y'all want to make major changes, and said, this ain't the way it is. Then they interviewed other people that said down where the tunnel was, people saw some fire from the tunnel, which is just beyond where he shot at that goes under the tunnel. Then there's across, I guess that's what they, people use different analogies. But if the freeway's here, R.L. Thornton Freeway's here, and then you got the school book depository here, and you got the fence line over here, that on the other side of the tunnels, which is where I think it's 3 major roads come together. I think there's Maine, Lamar, and something else. I'm trying to remember. I used to go down there all the time and I keep them straight, but memory fails me a little bit on that. But anyway, just above that, which was where the railroad track comes across, he said somebody was on the railroad track here and then down here. So at one point he said, look, he said, we was looking at somebody here on the railroad track, here on the road track, here on the road track, down underneath in the underpass. Then you had somebody over here to the right side of the school book depository, between the school book depository and R.L. Thornton Freeway, and before you get to the tracks, and that there was a policeman there, okay, and that they had heard about people that had badges saying Central Intelligence Agency, that were CIA operatives. What they were doing in the area, nobody knew. Nobody's never explained what the CIA was doing there, but they said they had DPD personnel identify, and actually, you know, we used to have these things to carry in our pocket. People that smoked back then had their notepad in this pocket so it didn't bulge out. Well, anyway, you had this flip. It was a flip thing, and you had two matching pens, and they always had to be on your left-hand side. Now, some of them old boys had 3 or 4 pencils and pens in there and stuff else, but anyway, you're supposed to have two matching pens. So if one of them gave out, well, anyway, they would write down the names of these CIA officials. They wrote the names of every Secret Service agent they come across. Police officers that other officers did not know checked. Because believe it or not, the Secret Service would get to Dallas 2-3 days, a week ahead of time, and they'd talk to Dallas police to see if any police uniforms had been stolen, police officers, any that had been fired or quit, if they had turned in their uniforms, so that they was accounting for things. They was looking for name tags, if all the uniforms was turned in, blah, 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 so make sure people couldn't impersonate a Dallas police officer, okay? The sheriff's office and the Dallas County Constable's office was the same thing. And Bill Decker was the sheriff back then, and Bill Decker, he was the law in Dallas County, Texas, let me tell you. He used to put a Decker hold on people. You wouldn't know such a thing as civil rights. If him or his deputies put a Decker hold on you till he come and seen you, that was it, period. End the conversation. Okay, so this is back in November of 1963, you see. So the civil rights movement was still going, but there wasn't actually a law back then, okay? I mean, there was one from the end of the Civil War, but there wasn't the modern 1964 Civil Rights Voting Rights Act and all that stuff. So things are still pretty screwy, and that's just how it was. In fact, they say that he had so much dirt on LBJ being from Texas that LBJ didn't even screw with Bill Decker, okay? Lyndon Baines Johnson, he kept dirty notes, and my chief got to know LBJ a little bit through this assassination thing, and having had an interview with him and so forth and so on. Of course, not all that's in the record. It's just he told me firsthand. So what I'm telling you is hearsay, but what he told me, when I heard it, it was firsthand information out of his mouth to my ear in late 85 and through the summer and late part of 86 and part of 87. Anyway, he said if you count the 3 people supposedly on the railroad, 1 man underneath, 1 man over here by that bush, then that's 5. You got a man here in the school book depository that was allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald, and then the one that was directly behind that was 7. He said, so we had 7 real viable gunmen, would-be assassins. And he said, so they were trying to get cameras from people that had taken pictures, and some receipts were given. Then a lot of people was complaining to the Dallas police that somebody had told them that they were Secret Service and confiscating their camera. They didn't know who the person was, and a lot of cameras so-called got lost, or whatever agents, like if somebody said, well, I'm Agent Bilderberg, okay, just making something up. Well, then they check the Secret Service, and there's no such agent, period. Not just not in Dallas, but they don't have nobody by that name in the entire agency. and a lot of people flashed something that looked like a badge, but they couldn't really see. Some of them didn't even show a badge, but they had on suits and ties and hats, and they looked the part. And they said they wanted this or that or the other, and they got probably 100 cameras that's all from the building. I'll try and find out the name of it. That sits right here where they're coming down in front of it, then they make their turn to go to the left, and then the school book depository is on this side. So my chief said, it is my absolute, total, unequivocal belief that there was 2 to 7 gunmen. He said Lee Harvey Oswald was not there by himself. He said, no matter what anybody says, no matter what they do, we done so many reasonable and logical presumptions and assumptions based on physics and reality. He said, you know, years later they have this scientist and that scientist do these echo tests and do this and that and the other. He said, but I was there that day. He said, I talked to the people in real time. He said, so being there, talking to people in real time, and he said it was a different day and a different time, and people acted different and treated people different. And he said it was just too much confusion going on, too many missing cameras, too many people that were supposed to be police that couldn't be accounted for, and that positively at least one CIA agent was up there in the bushy area. I call it the bushy area. That's between R.L. Thornton Freeway and between Dad and the school book depository. Okay, that was identified, that had real credentials. Okay, and so he said he was there as basically a spectator, and if he saw anything unusual or any contact information, he was to note it while he was there. So that was his story, and he stuck to it. And there wasn't no way that they could theoretically prove any different. They said, but, you know, actually after people went by, said there was little specks and pieces of the president's brain on the ground, and said, of course, nobody talks about it, but people, and even in different directions, that people had said, this looks like it's a body part or a brain part, and they'd have it in a Kleenex or something, and they'd bring it to the Dallas police, or they brought it to the sheriff's office, or they gave it to one of the constables, and supposedly it was all turned into Parkland Hospital. But my chief said that he knew that there was at least one officer that he knew for sure that had some of the president's brain matter and body fluid on something was turned into him, and he never turned it in. And the reason he didn't turn it in is because he wanted to have a keepsake of the assassination. He said, if this is gone, it ain't going to do no good. Okay? And there's different things he told me, you know, that I may think of later on and tell you. But I told you I would try and get something out in a day or two, and I'd like to keep my word and tell you that the jackpot is that there was 2 to 7 actual people. And he said, in his belief, there was at least somebody in the school book depository, and it probably was Oswald, and Oswald did shoot and did hit the president. He said there's practically no doubt. He said, in other words, I'm satisfied Oswald was part of the assassination. Whether he was a scapegoat or he was told he was the only person or whatever, he said, you know, we're never going to know all of that. He says, but he wasn't the only one there by no means, and said he was shot by at least 2 people. And one of the shots, at least one shot, was a forward shot. He said, so they would have to be down in the grassy knoll area, the fence area, on or below the above on the railroad tracks, or beneath. So the point is the more I talked to him, I said, well, are you saying Oswald got 2 shots in from behind and somebody got 1 in from the front, or what are you saying? He said, the way I recall that he was telling me is Oswald got at least 1 shot in from the back, and somebody from my forward position got 1 shot in from the front, maybe 2 shots from the front, but at least 1. And he said when we had the projector, he said at one point the Secret Service, Dallas Police, and just said his name a while ago, Bill Decker, the sheriff, and some constables, the constables, sheriffs, police, Secret Service, they were all kind of, for lack of a better word, they almost had kind of like a fusion center, but it wasn't. It was just all these people were gathered up in a group. Some of them were at the assassination site, and then some of them were at the hospital. He said then that evening time, someone was at the sheriff's office and someone was at the police department. Now, all the moves, I don't know, but I've been right there. Now they got it walled off, what is called the sniper's nest. But I mean, I've been there. I touched the wall. I've touched the glass. I've raised the glass up. I've stuck my head out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Of course, they got street lights, and I've looked, and I could see right down there where you could do a lot of damage, and it was a good sniper's nest. But from back in the back, see, this is at an angle. So one of them's at an angle. So your trajectory is kind of going away from you. Where if you're in the building that's catty corner over there, you can shoot, and it looks like you got a better vantage point from there. So he, at one point when I talked to Artie McKinney, he was like saying, well, 1 could have come from the schoolbook depository, 1 could have come from the back, and then 1 could have come from the front. I said, so that's 3. He said some people that may have been there may have chickened out. He said some of them may have seen that he was already hit, so they packed up and hit the road. In other words, he's already got a mortal wound, or he's been shot in the head. It's a kill. It's a kill shot. So no need in outing yourself and showing your position. But he said I believe without any doubt, from everybody I talked to, everything I've seen, the video, and he said he wasn't the only man with a video 8mm camera back in those days, or whatever they was. I guess it was 8mm. That a lot of people had 8mm cameras, and this was the big thing. And he said there's a lot of 8mm films that show it from different angles. He said I've seen a lot of 8mm films that we confiscated. And I said what we did was we had our lab, make extra copies of it. And he said we had big spools like this here that might be, they were 5-minute films. He said, but one would be spliced behind another, and said it would say reel 1, and it would have a little number on it. So we'd know what reel that come off of, because we didn't want to have a bunch of these little bitty ones. And so we had these here, and we had 10 or 15 canisters of them. He said we had investigators sitting in a room writing notes. He said this was for weeks and months later, writing. He said, I've watched these films. I've talked to people that videoed this. What did they see? What did they think? Why did they think it? He said, so I've come to the absolute conclusion there were 7 people there that were all prepared to shoot and kill the president. Okay? He said, Oswald's one of them. He said, but there's others. And he said, they're out there and they're alive. He said, but, to be alive in that day, he said, you got to know things that was going on with the mafia. He said, you really need to know Lyndon Baines Johnson. He says, people think they know Lyndon Baines Johnson, but they really don't. They really don't. Anyway, when I think of more things, or if you got specific questions of me, write them down, and I'll try and answer them in the comments or do another video. This is about half an hour, and my mind's wandering. I've been busy. I stayed up late last night preparing for a funeral, thinking of things I might tell you. When somebody says something to me, it's like it's in my deep mind, and I'm not thinking of it. But when somebody says blase, blase, oh, yeah, that's right, and I might come on with a whole new video on some new information. I'm not sure exactly what you want me to tell you, and without me throwing this out there, you're probably not sure what you want to ask. But yeah, I was on a panel on WFAA Channel 8 TV News in Dallas back in, I don't know, probably 73 or 74. It was like the 10th or 12th anniversary, and I got my dad to take me down there, and we was on the TV audience, and I used to go down there and talk to people all the time with their conspiracy theories and who and what and when, but I mainly listened to R.E. McKinney. Now, I will tell you that there was a man one time that threatened to kill President Reagan and Vice President Bush, and he said it on a loudspeaker at a club called Twiggy's. And I called the Dallas Police Department, not the Dallas Police, I called the Secret Service. They got some information from me, hung up 5 minutes later. They called and said, were you certified a peace officer on this date? Do you work for this agency? Is this your date of birth? Is this your driver's license number? Yes, hung up. And then about 45 minutes later, here come, this is a separate story, but anyway, here come these car racing like 80 miles an hour or something in a 55 zone, and then they whoop behind this club, and they whoop out around another club, and they pull into the police department, which is just down about a block. And I'm sitting across on the golf field, on the outskirts of the golf field, watching all this. There'd been some vandalism on the golf field, which is why I was over there watching it. And about the time I'm getting ready to get in drive and go see who pulled in over there, then they start calling me 602, be en route to the station to see 2 secret, and then it goes dead. And then I get there. Well, that was Agent Golden and Neal. They were out of the Dallas office, and they said, well, you know, you called us and said what happened was we found that the guy that you was talking about, we did locate him in Rains County, and he was set up to kill a deputy sheriff over there in the sniper's nest, which is what he said on the thing at Twiggy's. That's what he said there. And so that was the first thing, and he had maps, and he had a location, he had all of his armor, he had everything set up at the airport to kill the president and vice president. And the Dallas unit went out there and found his sniper's nest, and they said there's no way of knowing for positive, but said there's a 90% chance or better if you hadn't called us and you hadn't let us know this, he would have killed that deputy in Rains County. He had gotten his truck, and he would have got where he needed to got to his sniper's nest, and he would have killed the president and or the president and vice president simultaneously. And said, so it was you that did this. And we wasn't supposed to call the chief in the middle of the night unless it was something serious. In fact, when he used to leave town, they used to make me the acting chief of police when he'd leave town. But I said, man, we better call the chief. That's Secret Service, you know, it's pretty serious. And they said no calls in or out. Well, Asa, the chief dispatcher, we used to call him Chief Indian. You know, he wanted to let you know, I'm an Indian, I'm Native American. I said, well, me too, so what? He said, well, let's smoke the peace pipe, brother. Anyway, we called the chief. He went outside to a payphone and called him really quick. Well, the chief come flying in with his hair flying around. He was bald like me on the top, but he had the hair flying around on the side. Looked like Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future. He had that flying out hair. He had on his uniform, and he just looked crazy. And he's about 60 to 65 back then. He had retired from Dallas, then he went to San Marcos State University, and he served as chief from there for 10 years. So he had 2 retirements. He was working on a 3rd one with the city. At any rate, they were beside themselves with me and Asa. Said there were supposed to be no calls in or out. And I said, well, this is chief of police, and y'all have confiscated his office. And Asa said, I got in trouble when I didn't call him and let him know the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission, ABC, was here. He said, man, he said, can you imagine if you guys was here and I didn't call? And so one of them said, Robert, is that you? Yeah, that's me. And so I get them mixed up, Golden and Neil. I get those two names mixed up, which one it was. But one of those Secret Service agents had worked on the Kennedy assassination with R.E. McKinney, my chief. So they said, well, we've worked on one presidential assassination, and said, we come pretty close to working on a second assassination. If your officer here, Mr. Jones, hadn't got a hold of us, we wouldn't have got that guy, and said he likely would have killed that deputy sheriff, which was the first part of a two-part act, and he'd have been in Dallas and got President Reagan, Vice President Bush. But said, thanks to your guy here, we got the sniper's nest and got the guy. But now we got to pull in the constable that actually heard the man say it, and he didn't call us. But when your officer heard it, he told him, you need to call the Secret Service, and he said, bull crap. He said, he's just talking. But your officer made another officer that was working with him at the time drive him back to the station so he could call. He said, so you need to talk to your guy, and we're going to get him right, and we need to talk to this constable. Said, we got some cleanup to do, and this is a serious file. Anyway, the man wound up being sent off to Springfield, Missouri for psychological. But anyway, that was an agent. Well, they were reminiscing and talking about the old assassination once a couple hours went by. It's like now 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And they gone through a couple pots of coffee, and I didn't drink much coffee, but that day I was drinking some coffee. I was tired and wore out and having to pick up witnesses, and had to go get 20 people all night long, bringing them in for interviews for the Secret Service. And then some more Secret Service agents come down in the morning when we couldn't do it, and then we called some reserve officers in to be picking people up to get sworn statements from people that was there and what they heard and what they seen and what time and all that stuff. Anyway, the long and short was, I heard the Secret Service agent in chief say a lot of things he had told me. And the Secret Service agent said, well, you know, pretty much what you're saying is pretty much what I deduct, and most of us deducted that were there then. But there were things that went on the record and there's stuff off the record. Said there was enough stuff on the record that people really read it and really dissect it, then they're going to get a really pretty decently clear picture, you know, of the basics. Said they're not going to get into the little details and the nanoparticles, but they'll get into the major points of the investigation. And you know, they might not know that there was 7 gunmen that were there, and that there was at least 2, if not more, because we had to satisfy the society, the public at large, that the person, the man or woman or men and women that killed the president was in custody. We couldn't say that there's 1 or more people that's assassinated the president that's on the loose and we don't know who they are. And said, so they both agreed that the CIA knew for a fact who all the gunman was. And so I asked him, I said, that what you think? And he said, well, he said, look, he said, if we're talking official, I got nothing to say. If we're talking just you and me, he said, I tell you, there were 7 people involved, and at least 2, possibly 3, shot the president. And said the CIA knows exactly for a fact who all 7 gunmen were. And he said, and I'm not going to go beyond that. He said, but I will tell you that they're all protected, very well protected, and Kennedy was bringing back lawful money, not legal money, but lawful money that was actually backed by silver or gold, or silver and gold. So that was one problem. 2, he had tried to have Castro assassinated. 3, he was talking about dismantling the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. So he said, so he had three big, massive issues going on. And the fourth thing was, he wasn't for black people, but he wasn't against them. In other words, he believed, this is the agent talking to me, he said, my dealings with the president have always dictated to me, him and his family believed that black people should have a fair deal. They ought to be able to go to the ballot box and vote. They ought to be able to have businesses and driver's license, and they ought to be able to live their life equally fair. He said, however, he didn't believe that they were on the same level as white people, that they were subordinate to white people. He said, in other words, if he had a white man doing a job and he was going to pay him $5 an hour, the black man might get $4 an hour because he was an equivalent. He says, but if they did the same crime, like they both stole